Hello, welcome to Nashville Savvy. I'm your host, Megan Lee Putsiedlik, and today we're actually doing something a little different. We're going to do something I promised that I would do back in November, and that is a rhetoric breakdown of Mayor Freddie O'Connell. So every week I am an honorary part of the press corps and get to go in during the Q&A session that he holds on Fridays. And in those sessions, I can ask any questions I want. Of course, other journalists ask a bunch of questions. And I have noticed some patterns that O'Connell either invokes on purpose or just by the way that he speaks that tell you a lot about how he not only forms his rhetoric, forms his storytelling, but how he redirects, how he omits information, and how he uses his own storytelling for messaging, propaganda, that type of stuff. Now, these all sound like dirty, rotten words, but everybody uses a form of influence when they're expressing themselves, especially when they're trying to convey a message. So I do not mean that in any derogatory way, except for I am going to go back a little bit to a time in November when I wanted to originally do this following the Belmont shooting. So if you've been following me along, you may recall me mentioning this because I specifically decided to wait and kind of go over this Q&A that we did with O'Connell because it was done the day after the shooting. That was very tragic. I wanted to take a step away, give it some space, give it that grievance period before bringing it back forward and analyzing how he answers some of these questions because it was politicized in the moment. The politicization actually fizzled when the thread was kind of lost, and we can get into why that was after we go through the clip. But this first video is of that Q&A in the morning right after we found out about the passing of Jillian Ludwig, who was, to give you some context, she died after she was shot by a repeat criminal offender who was at large because he was found to be too incompetent to stand trial. So he really shouldn't have been out and about, and actually had just been arrested for something else and had skipped bail. And then this incident occurred. Now, when we went into the press conference, little was known about this circumstance. In fact, just before this segment I'm going to show you, the mayor had just informed us that it is possible for the shooter to, in fact, get off of these murder charges for killing Ludwig, get them dismissed due to this same statute that he had been deemed incompetent to stand trial. And that was a shock. Also worth noting, the gun that was used was not found at the time. It's actually unclear to me, and I've tried to find this out, if it has been found since. And that's worth noting because if it was legally purchased or if it was stolen is of interest, especially in the news. And speaking of the news, there had already been reactions to the crime. Special interest groups were already calling for gun control after this shooting. And so we're going to look at this video. O'Connell himself invokes some of that same rhetoric. And so we're going to start this video off. So where we're going to start is, given the situation, given the sensitivity, I was very delicate trying to get O'Connell to address the catch and release policy that's leading to an escalation in violent crime by repeat offenders in Nashville. And so I want you to know that this is audio that I take for my own transcription. So it's very low. I'm sorry, guys. So you guys, when he's speaking, you might have to turn it up. I did try to put, as best as I could, the transcript and just ignore the mistakes on it because I couldn't fix all of them. But hopefully, if you could see and read the text along with listening, you'll be able to clearly hear him and understand. But he is very Am I back? Sorry about that, guys, if this is actually live. So I think I'm back on. So we're going to keep going. So basically what I'm going to do is pull up this video. I guess we're going to have to edit this later. But the video that we're going to pull up is this Q&A. So if G is back at it, she could pull up that video for us. Sorry, Janina.
Piggybacking off of that, you've really been supportive of more wraparound community approaches to this in the past. Of course, this is something very immediate. So if something did come about sooner rather than later, like a change, you're saying that you would fully support that type of effort?
I think, yeah, I mean, this is an interest. This is a place in the law where my contention would be this, like the Waffle House shooter, like the Covenant shooter, these are scenarios where these are people that clearly should not have had legal, easy access to firearms, especially in the moments in the process leading up to the
So that's where we're going to stop it for now. So immediately after we hear, I asked my question about the catch and release, he immediately references the Waffle House shooter and the Covenant shooter. This is a redirection towards gun control. This is something that is used by politicians who are trying to push narratives in certain policy prescriptions. But notice how he uses two different types of shootings that aren't necessarily catch and release shootings. He just makes a general statement about not letting guns get in the hands of these types of people and invokes those two past incidences, which is a choice that he made when he was answering the question. So then I try to draw him out a little bit more because I want to talk about the catch and release. And I'm not a professional, like I'm not some like crazy investigative journalist going out and have all these tips and tricks of how to do this. But I wanted him to talk about the catch and release because it's been of a concern in our community here. So I try to draw him out to get him away from the firearm narrative and then to focus on those catch and release issues. Let's see where he takes it.
You were speaking about firearms. Do you think, too, that there would be anything that you would back about actually keeping these people off of the streets, not allowing them to go back? Of course, we saw this as like a catch and release situation.
Right. So I do think there is a lot that could be discussed about overall mental health capacity, both for beds and available facilities, just overall capacity for mental health. The difficult scenario here is this is somebody who was simultaneously incompetent to stand trial, but did not meet the test for involuntary commitment. And, you know, I think that's a case that is very difficult because it's still somebody who was clearly in need of either long-term access to treatment or possibly long-term access to far more than just an unsupported civilian life.
Okay. So this is a perfectly fine answer. The incident that happened was a scenario where the person was deemed too mentally incompetent to stand trial, but competent enough to avoid involuntary commitment. And so from here, I still want to talk about this issue of these people who are repeat offenders and how now we have different this like scare because this happened on a college campus of these people that are let back out onto the streets. So I'm trying to now bring it back to a point that's not just about the mental health, but perhaps maybe more about catch and release. So we also saw that during this pressure, I also want to take note that during this presser, I'm one of the only ones asking these tough types of questions. I'm the only one trying to redirect the narrative. So I am a little bit gentle with this. These are difficult questions and I'm not trying to get kicked out. So here's where we went with that. Oops, sorry guys.
Is there any specific thing that you would like to tell the community who might be a little bit more fearful? We've heard your You talk about mental health, illegal firearms, gun control policy, and of course your community partnerships with police. We've heard all of that. Is there anything specifically? We have a lot of fearful people out there who, they send their children out to college. It's very, very tragic.
So the thing I will say is it is the top job of the mayor to keep Nashville safe, and we work very closely. We've already made sure, for instance, that Belmont's on-campus security team is directly connected to Metro Nashville Police Department. Similarly, we have done something like that prior to the release of our resource guide for the conflict in Israel and Palestine, where we have worked on a specific strategic safety plan for institutions where we've seen an increase in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism locally. We are absolutely intent on making sure that in all of those things, whether it is resolution of crimes that have already been committed, but even better, crime prevention strategies, crime intervention strategies, and crime interruption strategies, we are doing all of those things. So one of the first things that in my earliest transition briefing with Chief Drake, we are on track right now to have a fully staffed police department next year under the existing budget. We have not been at that level for a decade, and so this is an important measure. The very first thing I did after being sworn in was sign the certificates for graduates of the Metro Nashville Police Academy's most recent class. They are now sworn officers, and we are going to continue that process to make sure we get to full staffing levels. Meanwhile, we got a $2 million grant for violence interruption, so we are trying to tackle this on all fronts, from traditional law enforcement, public safety, to those more community-based interventions that we hope prevent future tragedies. And I guess, again, the overall picture here is especially hard to accept or look to as a bright spot in the aftermath of something that is very tragic, and I think exhibits signs of risk or potential danger. But violent crime year over year is trending downward, and that is, I think, a sign of the success of our overall investments, the overall strategy we're pursuing, and we will continue to do so.
Okay, this is where we're going to stop with this video, and I'm going to explain. I did have a little bit more, but I want to explain. That was a really long answer to a seemingly short question, and this is something that O'Connell does a lot. I like to look at it as something, this is not a technical term, but this is how I visualize it. I call it splitting the river. So you'll start on one stream, and then he'll split off into all these other streams of thoughts and anecdotes and storytelling and, I don't know, like different, statistics and stuff like that. And then he kind of tries to bring them together. To be honest with you, at the end, most of the time he doesn't bring them all the way back together, but he splits off into all these little, he splits the river. Okay. He splits the stream in 100 directions, and it makes him really hard to quote. It makes him basically unquotable, very difficult. My editor gets frustrated all the time when I'm trying to put in a quote from Freddie O'Connell, because it's not a direct, decisive answer. It ends up having all these anecdotes, and it could be him. Excuse me. No, my cats, they always interrupt this podcast. That could be a strategy. I also think that for him personally, it's more of he's trying to answer the question correctly. He's trying not to put his foot in his mouth, and he thinks ahead of himself. And then it snowballs into this. But it is very hard to quote. It works for him if he doesn't want to get quoted on something. And he ties things back in here. So what did he put back into this mix when he was trying to answer my question? He brought back in crime prevention. He brought back in, we are staffing up the police. He brought back in, all these protests are happening, in Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. The Covenant leak had just happened, but he did not mention any anti-Christian, anti-white rhetoric, which was an interesting choice, that he would go down all these roads. Did not mention that. We just had that leak of those 3 pages of the manifesto to put that into context. And as I tried to get squeeze one last question out of him, that was the end. The end of the video was me asking about the anti-Christian, anti-white rhetoric, in which case he completely denounced any type of hateful rhetoric from anybody. Now we're going to go into a month later. So this was in November. Now we're going to December when I ask him about Corey Stone. Now I'm going to give some background in my question, so I'm not going to explain it, but this is another repeat offender who committed a crime against somebody in Nashville. And this was the question, if we could pull it up, G. I want you to listen to how he answers. Oops, sorry. Go ahead. I'm going to fix my cat.
We saw this unfortunate carjacking by a gentleman named Corey Stone, and it was by gunpoint over at the Kroger. When you look at his record, in the last 6 months, he's been arrested multiple times for firearm theft. Is there anything that you want to comment about that type of process, why these people keep getting in these situations where then something like this happens?
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is during the campaign, I mentioned that we would be looking at a comprehensive public safety plan. This is going to involve, at least here in the near term, because of these incidents, some initial review of that criminal legal process that will involve the district attorney's office, the judiciary, and so I did get a briefing with Chief Drake on some of the retail crime, and he speaks every week about where violent crime rates are and those kinds of things. But I think that's the next step. We don't have anything scheduled yet, but it is something we intend to do before the end of the year, is to try to get some alignment around these things where, if somebody is, I think there are some real questions about how bond is set, who is getting released, what the timeline of these things are, because, again, one thing that has come up repeatedly is that very often MMPD is not failing to apprehend suspects in these incidents.
Okay, so again, this what I would call splitting the river. He took a very long way to answer that question. He went down multiple avenues. He was pointing out all these other things that they're doing, not really directly addressing the catch and release problem, though he does give kudos. He brings it back in the end, and we have to give him credit here, where he brings it back in the end, where he gives kudos to, this is not a Metro Police apprehension problem. They are catching the bad guys, and then the system, the judiciary, and the policies are letting them back at large. So he does make that statement clear, which in this case, I did not follow up and press him because he did give me that at the very end. But you now see how when you're talking about how politicians are framing their answers, these are some of the tactics, and these are specifically some of the tactics that O'Connell uses or accidentally just happens to do. And I want you to kind of assess that when you're listening to, one, how the media picks through and picks their quotes, because you do realize that the media are cherry picking sometimes when they have to go through people's extensive quotes. Sometimes they take out the context in so many words. I just did a piece on this morning based off of the floor hearing in the House this week about Gino Bolso's flag law, which you could check out today. I think it's published by now, but I'm actually not sure. But it will be up later today if it's not already. But basically how different outlets have already called this law, they're highlighting the it's pro-Nazi flags and pro-Confederate flags, and it's specifically meant to be against LGBTQ. And when you actually look at the floor conversations and things not taken out of context, you get a clearer picture of what's actually going on. You can also be misdirected by how people ask questions and answer questions. And for our mayor, I wanted to give these specific instances of how some of the tactics that he uses. Again, these tactics are redirecting. These tactics are storytelling, where he kind of meanders and does the thing that I call splitting the river and taking the long way. He also tends to use technical language. He will refer to technical things. It's actually very detaching because it doesn't always feel as human as you want to feel when you're getting answers, comforting answers from a politician, especially somebody like an executive like the mayor, is that it feels very technical, it feels very detached, it feels over your head, or maybe you don't really understand what's going on. And he could hide things in that basically gatekeeping with technical terminology, with insider information that he may or may not have available to the general public. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to now look a little bit. I'm not going to bring up a video for this, but this is important going into the transit referendum, because we're going to see, of course, we're going to see messaging. Of course, we're going to see all sorts of posters, propaganda, PR to bolster this transit referendum, which is perfectly within the purview of the mayor's office. This is his referendum. He is the pro-transit guy. So you're going to see him try to fight against the negative press, the negative PR, the everything that's going to come out against this referendum with his more positive spin. And how he does that is basically the same way as this, is he will redirect, and he redirects a lot more about transit, because he doesn't like that people are coming out and saying like nobody rides the bus and, well, what's the buy-in? And so if you could go back and look at his release on the day that he announced that they were going to announce a transit referendum, I think it was last month, maybe just a couple of weeks ago. It is available on the Metro website on YouTube, where you could watch the whole entire press conference and Q&A. You cannot watch every one of these press conferences that I just had some of the recordings from. I have requested that, though. So hopefully in the near future, you can go back and actually watch those press conferences in entirety. But you can look at the transit referendum one. And interesting, during that, he did a couple things. For one, there was an investigative journalist who was asking specifically how much of this referendum means that, like, how much success is dependent on the increase in bus ridership, and how does the mayor intend to get more people to buy in and ride the bus. O'Connell took 3 minutes to just give examples of how, people who drive cars and they break down, they find out that the bus is a great alternative. Then he went on to explain how patrons who like to go to professional football games and hockey games and to the stadium and to all these other events, they're going to really love having this reliable transit. Never actually answered the question of like how this has to be funded, how much buy-in will it take, how many people have to be riding this for this plan to sustain itself. So, to the credit of that journalist, they doubled down and interrupted him and apologized. But, I just want to follow up, because I'm asking, and he tried to force the question, if you could explain how crucial the increase in ridership is to the sustainability of his plan. And he gives this long, convoluted answer where he states that it's already naturally occurring. We've already hit pre-COVID thresholds. We have some of our buses are standing bus only. And, we really need to just work on the regularity of these bus routes. We really need to make sure that you're not just waiting an hour in between opportunities, and that once you want to get on, there's actually room for you. So it's, the demand is out there. And I don't think that it's a precondition going forward with this referendum, because we're not confronting that problem. There is no empty bus problem. So he doesn't actually give any type of information about like, how can we sustain the buses? How can we use the funding of the fares from the buses to help sustain this transit plan? Still avoids answering that question, and instead does something that would help bolster his actual pitch, which is, hey, we're already growing. We're already having, some of our buses are already overflowing with people. We have to meet demand. So he redirects it back into the direction that he wants to pitch his referendum. It's happened. The same thing happened with the actual amount of money this was going to take. How much is this going to cost us? Now, one person asked this question, how are we going to fund it? And he referred to all this outside grant money, and the state has money, and all these other people are going to pay for it. You're not really going to have to pay for hardly anything at all. And then he also, somebody else asked him, like, but what's the rough ballpark estimate here? And he shied away from it until he was probed by another reporter. And he's like, well, I'd say it's safe to say it starts with a B, meaning $1 billion-ish or more. And then Stephen Cavendish, who is the editor-in-chief over at the Banner, doubled down and was like, hey, given these plans, that all these plans that you're going to potentially implement are already basically known, and you've actually vetted them already, it's safe to say that you have a fairly good idea of what the price tag is already. And to this, O'Connell replied, I mean, I'll say it this way. And this is a reframing mechanism that O'Connell uses all the time. Let me put it this way. I'll say it this way. He does it all the time, reframes it. He's like, the difference between $2 and $3 billion matters. And you want to be auditable before you say that that's one of the things you're going to talk about. So I'm going to wait until we have something that I feel is much better before talking about the price and before talking to the comptroller. So these are redirecting mechanisms. Now, again, good, bad, ugly. I'm not making any assessment on that. I'm just saying these are the things that you have to look out for, especially when they start using things that are in the news, things that are happening, to reframe a narrative to push policy, because it always comes down to pushing policy. That's what we saw with the gun, with the repeat offenders, where they tried to push it towards guns. It didn't really work with the Belmont shooter, because the Belmont shooter was dangerous at large, skipped bail, and we didn't really know if it was a stolen gun or a legally purchased gun. So that kind of puts a little bit of a kink in that line of rhetoric of, well, we can't let the guns get into these people's hands. Well, if it was a stolen gun, no law would have prevented that gun to get into that person's hands. We're talking about, we need to address the fact that this person had a criminal past that had not been addressed, and he was allowed to be at large and ended up in the tragic death of that Belmont student, which is still so sad. So I don't really like talking about it, but I'm just trying to help you see how they frame things, omit things, and it's always to set up policy platforms. And this is what politicians do all the time, but it's easier once you put some tools in your arsenal to help you break down how they're using the rhetoric and the storylines to redirect the narrative. Now, we're going to go into local corner. Local corner. I felt like I was being a teacher. This has been an interesting episode because it's been like it cut out and then my cat's hitting things. But this local corner is going to help you with everything I just said, because I'm not an expert. I'm just a reporter, and I have to try to thread through all of these narratives so I could attempt to ask the right questions to get to the truth and the reality of what's going on, so that hopefully I could give you all a better picture of how things are actually transpiring in the politics of Metro and the state sometimes when I cover the state. But today's local corner, I want to introduce you to the behavior panel, and hopefully maybe Geneva. Yes, perfect. So I stumbled upon this years ago. It's these 4 gentlemen, they're experts, and they do analysis on all sorts of, you could stroll, all sorts of people. They just did one on the interview with Vladimir Putin. They did one on that judge, Fannie Willis. I haven't watched all of these, but what's really nice is that it will take interviews, and these guys aren't just like 4 random guys. These are legit professionals that have worked for 3-letter agencies. I think 2 of them have helped with PSYOPs training, and one actually has done hundreds of hours, at least 100 hours of analysis on Vladimir Putin and his rhetoric, and has done a breakdown for agencies in the American government to help them know what his tells are when he's lying. But basically what they do, they're not there to weigh in on, not really even if this person is lying or not. What they're going to tell you is how this person is delivering a message and what are the tells. Is this person stressed? Is this person being deceptive? Is this person uneasy about what they're saying? What does their body language tell you about the message that they're conveying? They also do a lot with rhetoric. They show you where threads of narratives are redirected or storytelling is used to deter away from certain questioning. It's just really fun. The guys are really
Did
fun.
you
It's like
make
watching your
Kate
dads.
No.
It's like watching four dads. I hate to say it to those guys because I like them so much, but it really is like watching four of my dad give me an analysis, except for, of course, they're more expert than my dad is at giving body language analysis, but they're really great. And if you're looking for tools as you're trying to cut through the rhetoric and the BS that you hear in the news and from politicians, great for a presidential year. This is a great place to kind of get a groundwork and get your feet wet when it comes to this type of stuff, because they're just really fun and they really make it simple and applicable for you. So that's my local corner. And actually, the reason it counts as local corner is because I know that one of the guys either lives here or visits here often. So I'm calling it local because it's my local corner and I make up the rules. Okay. So anyways, we're gonna end on our Metro Mayhem. Let's just go into it. Metro Mayhem. All right, so we're gonna pull up just a tweet from Phil Williams, and this came out yesterday, and of course, it's like, do you know how much I love secret recordings that get dropped into my lap, especially when they involve the Tennessee legislature? Now, this is perfectly fine. And in fact, this whole tweet is it's not mayhem, except for the comment section where people are frustrated with people like Phil Williams, who only ever seem to get this top secret information about people in the GOP. And after all of this drama that's been happening and transpiring with Justin Jones, we haven't heard anything. We haven't heard anything about that legislative aide that apparently got in a confrontation and it was then put on temporary leave because they got in a confrontation about Justin Jones because apparently he was charging to take pictures with him. We don't get those secret tapes, okay? We only tend to get secret tapes from people in the GOP. Now, is that so bad? Well, he's legacy media and the GOP is in control of the state. So it's something that we absolutely expect to see from legacy media. But it is interesting that people are publicly voicing their concern that these people are calling themselves balanced and they refuse to cover, well, they only cover one side of the aisle and they seemingly refuse to cover any other sides that don't go along with certain narratives. So that is our Metro Mayhem for the week. I am going to be announcing today that we're going to start doing this show on Mondays, and hopefully that will help us be not only more organized and have more fun things for you, because it'll give me the weekend to put things together, but it'll be a little bit of a start to your week so that I will be looking backwards and forwards. That way you could kind of get your refresher, your update for the week, and you can look forward to what's going to come down the pipe throughout the week. I'm very excited about this change. I hope you guys are too. I hope you visit me back next Monday. And until then, stay informed.